Christine Marie, and on the weekends we tend to veer a little bit away from talking about the intellectual intelligence and artificial intelligence and focus a little bit more so on the inner structure of our being. The topics for Sundays typically tend to surround spiritual intelligence, the SQ, and I really like dedicating Saturdays to the EQ. EQ does tend to infiltrate the rest of the week because it is so incredibly important, especially in the age of AI coming in, where we're our EQ and our identity and who we are really is truly our major unique identifier. So we have to know who we are while also alchemizing these tools and leveraging them for the curation of our brand. But all of that, whether it's for our business brand or our personal brand, all of that comes on the heels of having a strong and robust knowledge of self. And we can't do that apart from emotional intelligence and the activation of other intelligences too. Even just this week, I was at DC Startup Week, and I was sharing with folks about the show, and they were asking what we talk about. And, I was sharing how it's not just the IQ, it's also the EQ. But beyond that, for those who leaned in a little bit extra, it's also the physical intelligence. Our body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk has that title for his book. He's the psychiatrist who coined the term PTSD because so many vets and also their clinicians and physicians didn't understand how the body literally stores trauma. And so these gentlemen would just have random freakouts to the point that they were institutionalizing these war vets because they had no category for what they were experiencing. Literally, the body did not know that there were not bombs going off right beside them. And so it's been wild understanding the physical intelligence that our body holds. And in order to truly know who we are and be able to ensure that our past isn't dictating the present, I read this the other day, which I thought was so beautiful, is that we're always going to hold fear for the future until we reconcile the past. Otherwise, we're going to predict our future as the past has been. So if we're afraid of what happened in the future and avoiding it and suppressing it, it's always going to come back and haunt us and color the way that we project the future, and obviously project that on the present as well. And so such a big question is, am I even seeing rightly? Joe Dispenza says it's impossible to even know reality because there's so much more happening than meets the eye. Yet for so much as we can know our reality, so much of that is predicated on the work that we've done, or lack thereof, in knowing ourselves and doing the work to understand each core intelligence and what does it have to say, what does it have to reveal to us, so that it's data, it's presenting. It doesn't mean that it's 100% of what is. It's a piece to the puzzle, and then we take that and then we make intelligent decisions based on the data that's being given to us. Tonight, though, I wanted to talk about the emotional intelligence side. And, just being aware of the data does not mean that we're healthy. Just being aware of it doesn't mean that we're intelligent. And really, I've been talking with a number of women around emotional abuse. And I want to lean into that topic. Frankly, it's something that I have historically avoided for a number of reasons. I just don't, I veer away from that because I actually don't want to get into why right now. Maybe at some point I will. But because I've been talking to a number of women who have been in situations where it's like, man, my husband is just so not emotionally present. My husband is causing me so much emotional grief. And we're going to have a conversation specifically for men, because I talked to two different men who are in the middle of a divorce because of this very reason with their wives. It's like emotional battering from the female to the male. So it goes both ways. But tonight I want to talk to the women. I want to talk to the ladies because it's just been coming up more and more often. So with this whole conversation, there's an element of fear and trembling that I hold around this topic, because it is so man, it's so fragile and it's so unique to each person, and it holds so much resonance for so many folks. Sandra, I just saw your chat. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining. This conversation has to be had though. And there are folks who are, experts in this regard. And so this is the, I guess you could say, layman's perspective who has experienced it in the past, who kind of awoke to it. So I'm not at the point of ever counseling around it, but it's just more so shining a light on what I've learned. For the purpose of education and ultimately freedom, right? Coming to the point, David Goggins. David Goggins said this. He said, I would rather, he's the like ultra marathoner. He ran, I think was it 100 hours? He ran constantly for 100 hours and like didn't stop and ended up winning this like ultra race. It was insane. So he is ultra everything and former Navy SEAL. And he said, he was like, I'd rather effectively have every single person I encounter come to this demarcating line after speaking with me where I don't care if they like me, I don't care if they're happy, but they have to square off with a person in the mirror. They have to take radical action. And so I don't want to lose connection with people. In fact, connection has been, I think, actually the demise and the danger of what can actually lead us into the environment in which we find ourselves, which is emotional abuse. Connection has been such a priority and such a goal for me my entire life that it actually has been a danger. I read recently about the dark side of empathy. And I that for me, man, that resonated so much because empathy is so beautiful and so important and so healing. And there's a dark side to it. With every light, there's a shadow. And so the question is, are our goals, are our ideals actually potentially blinding us from the truth and from reality itself? And so I want to talk about this conversation. Mark, thank you so much for joining. I'm so happy to see you. And I'm excited to, I have an email in draft mode for you. So that's coming soon. Y'all, I was given a book about 4 years ago. I don't know. I think it's reversed. No, it says, Is It Me? And it says, Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage. So this was actually written in a Christian perspective, but it's very universal, which I appreciate. I was in what started out as a Christian marriage. And so that's why I was given this book. Around, I guess, like 3 or 4 years in, my husband ended up changing his faith and changing direction for kind of his life on a spiritual level. And so it was no longer, I guess you could say, a Christian marriage. But some of the things I actually wanted to read to you tonight, because I read this, when I was just starting my journey of emotional health and emotional intelligence. I actually started my journey first by a dear friend of mine. She introduced me to the 𝐸𝐴𝐴gram, which is a personality test. And it was so helpful just starting to be curious and lean in. And this is before I at least had the algorithm tuned into topics around emotional intelligence and emotional health. And I was so far and distantly removed from any type of concept of what is emotional health. And I just had viewed emotions as weakness. So I was very much so on the opposite side of suppress everything. Don't look at it. My journal was the only outlet when I felt very desperate. That was the place I would go. And actually the thing that incited me first to go to counseling was to process the death of my brother-in-law from 6 years prior. And I just had suppressed that for so long, and I never dealt with it. And I just saw it was like eroding me. And so that was what initially catalyzed my therapy journey. And shortly thereafter, my husband ended up leaving. And so then all my attention switched in my therapy journey to processing that and processing that loss. So I want to talk to you about this because this book was given to me. Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage. I had never heard a lot of terms like cognitive dissonance, but we're going to talk about that here tonight. We're also going to talk a little bit about what is emotional abuse and some examples that are actually offered in this book that I found to be just so helpful for me. Some questions that you can ask yourself if you think that maybe you might be in that. And then what can we do about it? Because it's not just about, man, honestly, it's almost dangerous how many people are throwing out the word narcissist and gaslighting these days. It's like, that's a very serious. Narcissism is actually literally a clinical term. And so we can't just go out and call someone a narcissist, because the clinical element around narcissism is that their brain literally is missing the neurological development and processing of empathy, thus being able to engage with somebody. And typically that missing piece is because they encountered something at such a young age in childhood that part of them never fully formed because their developmental process was stunted by trauma, which is just so devastating. It's this like 2 or 3-year-old little kid who never was able to fully form. And then it's not like it's justified, but there is a why. There's a why for every single, there's a why tracing down to every single story, moment, memory in our lives. And so if we lean in and ask why of anything here in the present moment, it always has roots to the past. And so even today, I was actually in therapy. I started therapy again. I took a break for a number of months, about a year or two, just very infrequent, and started up again. And I'm just so grateful for it. It's just so helpful to have someone to bounce things off of, and it's accountability for me personally, and it's effectively, I'm like, this is my study, this is my vocation. It's like really just understanding the human being as well as branding and marketing, but really brand and the way we show up so often is predicated, again, as we were saying at the beginning, in who we are. So with that, I am going to read just some very intro parts of this book, Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage. So the initial question is, does this sound like you? And I'm going to give you 3 or 4 different scenarios. This is in quotation marks. So does this sound like you? Why do concerns I bring up never seem to be resolved? Why do I feel like Charlie Brown flat on his back from having the football snatched away? Why, when I bring up a concern, do I always end up justifying my existence or being the one to apologize? How do things seem to get turned around on me? I feel like I walk on eggshells. I'm afraid of his reactions to grievances I express, so I keep them to myself. Praying, bargaining with God, and submitting more hasn't ever improved our relationship, but I'm stuck here. Because if I don't hold up my end perfectly, I can't ask him to do anything. I do searches on Google like, why doesn't my husband love me? And why don't I love my husband? And I actually marked this 4 years ago. I wrote wow next to it. I remember as a young wife thinking, is it normal? Does everyone feel this way? Maybe this is why old wives seem bitter. It wasn't until year 7 that I finally acknowledged something was wrong and there wasn't anything I could change to make it better. It was years 15 to 24 that I became unsure of reality and questioned my sanity. Literally, this woman was in a marriage for 24 years. Almost 10 of them where she was unsure of reality and questioning her sanity. What the last one that I want to read, does this sound like you? No one yells emergency, call 911, or divorce with all those tiny little that's a bit off moments, or maybe the ouch, he hurt me scenes, or the what the heck was all that about confusing moments that pile up over a period of years. All those tiny little pieces of the puzzle are things you just toss out with the trash because you're too forgiving, too patient, too loving, too empathetic, too kind, too giving, too enamored with him. Until you start to secretly collect them and put the real pieces of the puzzle, the truth, together and see a much clearer picture. Oh, even in reading that, I'm like, oh gosh, I just feel the weight of that. I'm going to move forward a little bit just because there's a story here, this woman named Julie, and it's talking about her. So I'm just going to read a little bit more if that's okay. What was wrong with her? The burden of parenting alone most of the time was starting to break her down. She was getting short with the kids, exhausted, burnt out. When he would start in on her, she'd fight back now, saying sarcastic things she regretted later. He would point out what an angry, bitter woman she was. She was unforgiving, disrespectful. He'd tell her everyone agreed with him. She had problems. She began to hate herself. At church, she made sure to dress up, smile, and keep her kids in order so the other ladies would know she was doing the best she could. If they knew the kind of angry, negative things that went through her head, they would be shocked. Once she told a friend at church about something painful her husband said, but her friend told her she needed to talk about her husband in a more respectful way. She needed to be more forgiving and overlook his sin. She felt ashamed. He was a good man. He was faithful to her. He took the family to church. He read the Bible every day. In fact, he knew the Bible so well, he could pull out Bible verses to support his various observations of just how bad she was. She would weep in church when they sang songs about the grace of God. She wanted to feel that grace so badly, but most of the time, all she felt was the condemnation of her husband and God too, because didn't he speak through the authorities in her life, like her husband and church elders? She was pretty sure God was disappointed in her failed efforts at creating a happy, peaceful home for her husband and children. She felt so much anger and resentment and hopelessness. How could God love her like this? She often locked herself in the bathroom, crying in hopeless desperation on the floor, begging God to help her be a better woman, begging God to forgive her, begging God for some reason to keep trying. Her mind looped over and over on the same things, mentally spinning in relentless cycles. She was anxious and depressed. She had a panic attack on the road the other day and had to pull over for fear she would black out while driving her young children to school. She was terrified there could be something seriously wrong with her. When she looks in the mirror now, she hates what she sees, a scared, indecisive, insecure, stressed out, unhappy woman who can't seem to do anything right. What happened to the girl she once was? She feels hopelessly stuck and there's no way out. She made her bed and now she'll just have to lie in it until she dies. Sometimes she thinks about dying, that dying would be better than living this way another day. And this is a quote from another book that's included in this one. And again, this is oriented towards Christian folks. But frankly, I think that so many of us grew up with a religious background that's very deeply impacting our subconscious. So I actually think that it's so important for us to consider and this is a bit of a tangent, so stay with me. Our subconscious beliefs about God and how he views us and what we have to do to be a good person can really impact the way we view marriage and the way we view relationships at a deeply subconscious level. That's where it's like, okay, we need to bring our subconscious into the conscious state. And that's where it's like, okay, ask why, and trace the root down. And so taking an experience, a moment here in the present, and asking why of it 4 to 5 times and just getting down to the very core memory, get to a very specific memory, whether it was watching your parents interact or sitting in church or, whatever religion it was, hearing some kind of elder, some kind of spiritual guide telling you what it would be like for you to be a good partner. Those moments really solidify. Maybe it's even you reading something as a child. So do the work on that, because that's a very subconscious but very, very impactful experience as a child that shows up today that we just often don't even realize. Okay, here's the quote. "The Lord never skirted truth nor backed away from it. He was always moved with great compassion and tenderness, but he never denied reality. If you want to untangle the difficult situation in which you find yourself, it is important for you to be courageous enough to face the truth and seek the wisdom you need to make the next move." And then the last thing that I wanted to read, I think this is the last thing, we'll see. When I'll say a woman or a man, when a woman or a man is experiencing these kinds of behaviors over a period of many years, her emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being begin to break down. There are 2 reasons this behavior is destructive. One reason is that they are connected to positive behaviors. The husband isn't always being disrespectful, neglectful, or unloving. Sometimes he's amazing. Sometimes he's attentive and kind. This creates extreme confusion and what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs whenever there are 2 opposite realities side by side. In this instance, we have an intimate partner who is sometimes wonderful and sometimes cruel. And y'all, that's so important. I'm just going to keep going for a second. Our brains can't figure that out. And if this crazy making occurs over a long period of time, it sets up a stress and trauma response that can cause symptoms of complex PTSD. So I just felt compelled to talk about this tonight. We're going to go deeper in just a little bit here, but I just really felt compelled to share that because y'all, in talking with a number of women and just moving through some of this together, it's like, man, when is it that there's just somebody having a bad day versus when is it actually emotionally abusive. And that's why this topic is so, it feels like just walking so delicately, because it is so unique to each person's experience. And I think what's also really, really important to note is that when you know why the person is acting that way, it's so much easier to extend empathy and care and really put yourself in their shoes and hold so much love for that person as they're moving through like an outburst or acting a certain way. And actually, I said I was going to be done, but I'm not. I'm actually going to read quickly what are some of those behaviors that show up that are very much so similar to what would be categorized as emotional abuse. Okay. Does he chronically turn a discussion into an argument and blame you for intentionally starting an argument? Does he ignore your efforts to connect? Does he delay answering emails, texts, or phone calls? Does he avoid eye contact when you're talking to him? Does he sigh or scoff or use facial and body language that indicate his disinterest or annoyance with you? Does he chronically put his own interests above yours? Is he chronically critical in your interests, hobbies, and choice of clothing, personal style, friendships, fears, hopes, and dreams? Is he chronically sullen when you're happy? And alternatively, is he happy-go-lucky when you're suffering in some way? Is he chronically unavailable when you need him most? Is he chronically uninvolved in the daily emotional burden of raising the family and running the household? Does he chronically tell you what you're thinking? Does he presume to interpret your heart or motives? Does he maintain that his accusations of you are true regardless of what you've explained? That's a big one. Are they actually open to listening and hearing? Does he chronically use you in bed, meeting his own needs while disregarding yours? Has he ever raped you, making you have sex when you didn't want to? Does he chronically lay the blame for the marriage problems on your shoulders? Is he unwilling to take responsibility for his behavior? Is he offended when you give him feedback about these behaviors? Is trying to solve your partner's problems and manage his emotions all you can think about? Do these problems steal your attention from everything and everyone? Does he chronically refuse to take responsibility for his actions and attitudes in your relationship by blame shifting, denying, justifying, or minimizing his behaviors? There's more here, but I'm just going to read a few more. There was one part that I actually wanted to speak to because someone very specifically brought this up to me the other day that, man, it's just so damaging when this happens. One of those was just really like shutting down and shutting you out. But I don't see it on this list. I saw it earlier when I was prepping for it. So, okay. Just talking a little bit more about this. Some of the helpful things that have been meaningful to me over the last 4 years as I've been doing this work to know myself, and also analyzing how I've existed in relationships in the past where it's been emotionally abusive. Honestly, one of the biggest things is me knowing who I am and reaffirming my identity, because it is so devastating being in that dynamic where that person is effectively that moment that I just pointed out a second ago, where effectively if they're continuing to reaffirm their experience while you're like, no, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And they're accusing you and saying, you are this, you are that. That's very different than I feel this way. I feel sad. That's so different. That's very, man, that's so damaging to have someone you love, have someone you trust most intimately accusing you and calling you something and blaming you, saying you are this way. It erodes your confidence. It erodes your ability to truly roll your shoulders back and be all that you can be. And what this does, one of the things that they pointed out is, are you constantly thinking about this person and how to manage their emotions and how to manage effectively their reality so that you're existing in peace? And so some of the warning signs that I would say, not necessarily that this indicates emotional abuse. I want to talk about emotional health. Actually, this morning while I was in therapy, it was so helpful. He said, focus on the positives. What do you want it to look like, rather than just, I hate this, I hate that. That's so negative, and it really doesn't build up and it really doesn't help you move forward. So it was really encouraging this morning to focus on the positives. So emotional health, the signals of that, moving away from a lot of those kind of negative behaviors that I just read. some of those signals in terms of moving towards a better outcome is to do the work for me, to assume radical responsibility, to go inward and know who I am, know my identity, know what God says about me, because y'all, that was so important. That talk about how the subconscious beliefs around religion show up today. I actually thought in my bones that I was an evil person, and that it is only by the grace of God that I existed, that he loved me, because I'm just so evil. So then when I had relational issues in the past, it's like, well, of course they don't like me. I'm a horrible person. And it just fed into this narrative that I already had. So when we encounter these experiences with our partner, it's not to diminish their responsibility. We're talking just about you right now. When I have that moment with my partner where my partner says something and I feel a certain way, that was already in me. That's there already. They're mirroring it. I'm seeing myself in something that they say. It was so funny. I had this moment with a friend the other day where they said we were having so much fun. We were so connected. I love the concept of effectively putting gas in the tank and like fueling your relationship by way of quality time and whatever your love language is. You're putting gas in the tank, and now you've got gas to run on, so that if there's a problem or a hiccup, you've got fuel in the tank to move you all forward. And so we were investing in each other and just having a blast. And then they said something and they were like, I'm so sorry. I did not mean it that way. I can totally see how that would be taken out of context. And I was like, you know what? That actually didn't bother me whatsoever. And I realized in that moment, if there was little to no fuel in our tank, that probably would have bothered me. And if there had been little to no fuel in my tank too, because we've got the relationship tank and then we've got my tank and their tank. This is platonic or romantic and everything in between. If we're running on fumes, we have so little capacity and so little, I guess you could even say, it's not even just capacity. It's like space to just take a pause, take a breath, take a moment, or just overlook it altogether. If we're running on fumes, we've got nothing to give. And so it's not just about, is there gas in the tank of the relationship? Is there gas in my tank? Am I okay? Am I filled up? Am I doing well? And that's where this question and this piece of identity is so incredibly important. It's who do I know myself to be? So that, God forbid, anybody else, much less so our partner, which is so devastating, our partner or anyone else comes in and questions that, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's not true. Like no skin off my nose. I'm good. I know that that's not true. But if they're saying something that causes a stir in us, man, that was already there to begin with. And I don't want to diminish their responsibility. New seeds can be planted, of course. So if our partners and others in our lives are continuously saying something, it is worthy of us. And this is another part of our responsibility, is to actually hear what's being said and actually examine it. Because if we're willing to square off with the truth, we're going to take feedback that comes in. I liken this to James Allen. I've got his book here, right here. As a Man Thinketh. I love this book. Look, you can see how massive. I was talking with one of our clients the other day, and I was like, dude, you can become an author. Just write, it's like a 60-page book, or it's an 80-page book, and look how big it is with all the spacing. I'm like, just go be an author. If you've got something to say it, but it doesn't need to be long. He likens our minds to a garden. And what I love is that not every single seed that is handed to us and offered to us should be planted in our minds. We need to take everything, every input, and analyze it before we allow it to have root in our mind, traveling down to our soul and spirit, because that effectively becomes an output. Every input that we accept and allow to come into our information processing system, for all my computer tech friends, once they come in, they gestate, they take root. They're now a part of the garden of my mind, and they've made their way now into my soul, and they're going to be coming out at some point. So when we talk about putting the fuel in the tank, What kind of fuel is going in? Now it's a question of quality. It's not just a question of quantity. It's, okay, well, what kind of fuel are we putting in? Who is feeding our minds? Who is feeding our soul? Who's feeding our spirit? We talked about our intelligences. What are the inputs impacting every single one of those intelligences? And when I was in Prince Edward Island a couple weeks ago, it was so helpful to just eliminate all inputs for about almost 2 weeks. No books, no podcasts, no music, and really allow for my information processing system to just filter what was there and get things out and eliminate it. Our body goes through processes that eliminate toxins and waste, and so we need to allow for our soul, mind, and spirit to do the same thing. It's time to expel what needs to go because it doesn't belong there, but we need to know what's there. That's where doing the work to know ourselves and doing this whole process of what excavating the soul, that's what I like to call it. Doing the work to know then sets us up for, okay, this is what should stay. I love that. This is what needs to go. This is actually what needs to be updated or upgraded, given that I'm no longer in this environment. So let's say as a child, I have an experience with my mom. Well, my mom telling me to do something when I'm 5 years old is very different than her telling me to do something at 25 years old. That's the same type of relationship. I still want to have a relationship with my mom, but that needs to be updated to suit who we are today, the environment, how we've evolved. But if we're not actually updating our intelligences are going to be running on autopilot and never actually update according to the new dynamics that we find ourselves in. And then we're going to stay emotionally stunted at whatever age until we actually allow for those ages to mature with us. And so often the stunting process happens when there is a painful moment or memory that we need to process and we don't. So think of it as anytime that there's a moment of pain or trauma in our lives, you kind of have to move through the trauma to get to the other side, and think of it as almost like this emotional tunnel. You have to move through the tunnel to get to the other side and continue to evolve and grow emotionally, maturing into adulthood. But for so many of us, because we put the brakes on the second we see the emotional tunnel and we're like, don't want to do that. That's scary. We end up being 14 years old at the moment when we were rejected by somebody that we liked. And we never evolved past then. So now we're in romantic relationships where we're constantly fearing rejection. Or we never moved through a moment in time at 7 years old where our dad hurt us. And now we're looking for, this is the thing. When my partner says something that triggers something in me, it's not just that I feel hurt and upset. I'm actually seeking it out to validate that. I believe it for a reason, right? I actually posted about that this morning. Us projecting fear on the future because of unresolved trauma from the past, ultimately, we're constantly on high alert looking out there for validation of what we believe. And then it's anytime something bad happens, it's up, I see, told you. I knew that was going to happen. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so the narratives that we tell ourselves. So when it's like, okay, well, how do we do this work? How do we come to know? First, it's that work that I told you. Anytime we have a moment and we feel triggered, trace it down for the root story. What is the genesis story? And y'all, we're actually going to be doing this deeper on Thursday, the 30th at noon Eastern. So if you want to join, go to my recent post. It's in the chat and it's free. But it's a 90-minute workshop that we're going to do. And it's really about identifying these origin stories. So that's one way to do it. And then another way to do it is to actually identify what are the core narratives that were formed as a result of that story. So, for example, when I was 9 years old, I have this very core, vivid memory of me sitting in my bedroom looking out the window, and it actually felt very like dramatic. I was looking out my window like, oh, all right, God, it's you and me against the world. And it was this moment that I'll always remember. I remember where I was. I remember what the scene was outside. And y'all, that narrative is something that continues to want to be true in my life until I retrain my nervous system. This is where the body keeps the score. Our body remembers things. Our body knows things. That's why it's so important. Everyone's the people who want to disassociate from their past and say, "Ah, the past doesn't hold weight over me." It's like, maybe it doesn't intellectually, but maybe it does physically. Maybe it does emotionally. Maybe it does spiritually, talking about why we need to understand how our spiritual experiences in childhood show up and in our subconscious, that how they show up today. It is wild the amount of elements that really have a hold over us, apart from us going in with intentional pursuit to uncover the genesis origin story. So with that, then it's okay, how do I then retrain my nervous system? And actually, this now it's been a couple of weeks since I had this conversation with my brother Jared on Sunday a few weeks ago. But if you go to the Knowing Show on YouTube, if you go to the Knowing podcast, it's under the live sections there, and it's on playlist, the Knowing Show, and it's with my brother Jared Hoffman. So you'll see his name there. He brought up just such a beautiful, poignant truth that until our nervous system is at a place of like real calm and stasis, then we can start retraining it. But if we're never getting to this point of peace, we never can actually evolve and retrain our programs in our mind, in our body, in our soul, and our spirit, because we're constantly on high alert. We're constantly moving. And it doesn't mean that our nervous system is necessarily activated by way of like those 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It doesn't mean that we're in a state of survival by way of, our nervous system is always moving. We could just be really busy and never actually allowing for our body to sit with that which it knows, and even realize, oh, I've been carrying that narrative for a while. That narrative, it's me and God against the world, is looking to be fulfilled. So now every time I feel abandoned, or anytime I feel like I'm not wanted or that I don't belong, it's reinforcing that subconscious narrative. Okay, so how do I get my nervous system in a place where I'm able to be so peaceful? And frankly, this is why vertical alignment matters so much. In order to reprogram and rewire, we need to get our body so into alignment, our body, soul, spirit, and mind into alignment, so that we can train it to think a new way. And so when it comes to, who was it today? A friend of mine posted on Facebook, said, and I think it was Jason Fladlin. He said, it was so powerful when he was able to conquer his limiting beliefs. Those limiting beliefs are so real, and they show up in our business. They show up in our lives in every regard. And so this work to know who we are, impacts everything. It's like, that's the nucleus. And then from that, every part of our life is impacted. So sure, call it a luxury to do the work, but also we have this ability and this privilege, this responsibility to do this work, to actually play out, okay, how then am I going to live my life? And so with this whole element of our responsibility, us doing the work to know who we are, being sure of our identity, so that when somebody comes and says something, we can use it to reflect, okay, is that actually in me to begin with? Am I looking for somebody to justify and reinforce this thing that I actually do believe? And also, am I confident in who I am? Do I know the truth to begin with, to then be able to combat a lie? Are we even equipped with the fortification of our mind, soul, spirit, and self to be able to withstand when someone comes and attacks us verbally, mentally, emotionally? Do we even have that layer of protection? And then I also want to add in too, in terms of what we can actually do about it. Do we have anyone that we can confide in? This is where therapy was actually so helpful for me, because for so many years, I just found that my relationship was reinforcing my fear that I'm not a lovable person, and therefore I didn't want anyone to know what my former relationship, that man, knew about me. So I hid it. I hid it from everybody, lest I lose more people, and more people started to not like me. And so because of that, the emotional abuse remained in the dark, and I was slowly dying on the inside because nobody had any clue. So this element of community and this element of accountability, and it doesn't need to be massive community. Someone who I know and love, her husband had an affair, and she was like, I didn't want anyone to know other than my, for her counselor was her pastor. So my pastor and his wife, and maybe like one or two girlfriends, and no one else knew. And that's okay. It's not to go tell it from the rooftops. In fact, sometimes I actually find that it can be more damaging the more open we can be without wisdom to share and espouse. Brene Brown talks about this in Daring Greatly, which I really appreciate. The vulnerability vomiting, just sharing vulnerability because you're trying to get your needs met to everyone and it's not appropriate. That really can actually do real damage rather than sharing vulnerability within the confines of the arena, going into the arena, doing the work, having boundaries there, having confined set of rules of engagement and sorts like that just keeps you safe. It keeps them safe too, right? Because so many times other people haven't asked for it. And so having the arena and bounds of engaging surrounding vulnerability is so wise and really, truly comforting. And then you can say, this is how I need to be cared for right now. So accountability, knowing the truth for yourself, having done the work to identify and doing the work, it's an ongoing thing to identify, is what that person's saying actually in me already? And then how do I combat that? And this is where it's so case by case, emotional abuse is it's so devastating. It's so damaging. I see so many effects of it, and it's just so grievous, It's so painful. And y'all, so many times, even as I read this, so this is me being just so freaking honest. Ugh, and I hate saying it. When they were talking about examples of emotional abuse, they said, where was it? Oh, does he sigh or scoff or use facial and body language that indicate his disinterest or annoyance at you? I have sighed, in my relationships, and I've done the eye roll. And that is really painful and hurtful for the other person watching. And that's really hard. And so that's where emotional abuse. It's such a broad category. And so I don't ever want to say this is what it is. And even still, I was looking on different, at different psychological websites and reports and such. And, there's so many loose definitions. So it is really dangerous to assign it to anyone. But I do think it's really important that we know the impacts of being in a relationship where it's a lack of emotional health. So whether it's to the point of abuse, where you're actually questioning, am I a terrible person? Am I worthy of love? No, some of the things I found myself thinking in the past was, no one else has ever disliked me. What's wrong with me? What did they see in me that no one else sees? Those were just some of the things. I felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time, all of those little moments and all of those little questions that we start finding ourselves asking. All of those are just warning signs that we're at best in an emotionally unhealthy relationship, at worst an emotionally abusive. So really, I want to read this because at the end of the day, it's our radical responsibility to take action. And this is what, what's her name? I appreciated this. Deborah Cohen, she's a PhD in sociology from University of South Carolina. She said, it may be the case that a person tries very hard to communicate their unhappiness and frustration, but does not feel heard, and they keep going along with the way things are. However, we owe ourselves and our partners clarity and honesty in terms of our expectations and sense of direction in the relationship. It's as simple and complicated as letting the other person know, I'm not happy with the way things are going, and I need you to know that. And I need to know that you care for me. We have a responsibility to communicate our needs and desires and expectations in a relationship. And y'all, I would even go further than what she said. Are we even being clear of, this is what care looks like? Because if we're not clear on our own roadmap of how we want to be loved And if we're actually not taking the steps to love ourselves and give ourselves what we need, man, I find it so unfair to be asking our partner to meet our own needs for us. That is a recipe waiting for disaster. Yes, I think that I said that the right way. Um, there's a lot more that we could talk about here. So if you want to dive deeper on this, feel free to send me any questions in the DMs, and would love to dive deeper on this if that would be helpful. There's a lot more that we could go on, but for now, I hope that you do take this as an opportunity to do an analysis for yourself, for your relationship. Where is their emotional unhealth? What are the new narratives you're finding yourself asking about yourself that that maybe never were there before the relationship started? And then communicate it. And what do you need? The emotional, the practical steps, even the spiritual element too. Just everything. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I will drop the link here in a little bit to Thursday's conversation, where we're going to be diving deeper into our origin stories. Oh no. I was right at the end too. Okay. It's not gone. I'm going to drop a link.